But 1 Corinthians 7 challenges us that as Christians, freedom is a value. Freedom is something we need to strive for. Freedom is something we need to take advantage of. Not food stamps, not vouchers, freedom. That's the encouragement. If we have the option, if there is, in our budget, the option to be free, if that option is available within our system of governance, then use it rather. Why? You're bought with a price. Be not the servants of men. That's the principle here. And welcome, friends, to Generations. Kevin Swanson with you, Danny Craig, also in studio with me this time. Thank you, Danny.
Yes.
And today we want to talk about the blessing of home education, the explosion of the free market in education, and the freedom to not be subjected to government requirements, government standards, to the freedom for families to be able to operate, to raise their children in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord Jesus Christ, apart from the state coming in and saying, here's our religion, let me impose this upon you. There was probably the most blessed, the most wonderful blessing that God put upon a nation for such a time as this was this explosion of homeschooling. And it began, of course, way back in the 60s and 70s when my folks started to homeschool us. And then it's exploded into, 4 or 5 million homeschoolers, even within the state of Colorado. We've got
big news this week.
Good news, big news.
I got an email in my inbox. Someone said, wow, what are you doing in Colorado? As if Check and Generations were responsible for this.
Yeah.
I don't think we want to take the credit for this one. But
Huge increase in homeschool enrollment. Looks like about a 10,000 person increase.
10,000 decrease in public
schools, yes.
And a 5% increase in homeschooling.
In homeschool participation. Yeah. And the same thing happened during the COVID years, but it appears COVID's not over, or at least the trend that was brought about by COVID is continuing with homeschooling just exploding across this state, and I think throughout America and other countries as well. So for such a time as this, God has brought a blessing to the world. And so, but what does the enemy do? The enemy shows up and says, hi, we're from the government, we're here to help you. And by the way, if anybody ever knocks on your door and says, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you, tell them no
call
thanks.
Heritage Defense.
Yeah, call Heritage for Defense. Just say, no thanks, we're good at this point. Move on.org. But that's what happens. Governments, they're going to respond to this. And the power mongers that want not just the funding, but also the control of education are going to step in and do their very best to co-opt the movement. And that's the sort of thing that's happened for the last 25, 30 years. Since, I'm going to say, the latter 1990s, state after state after state has come in and said, we're going to introduce voucher programs and find ways to regulate, fund, and control the homeschooling movement across America. It began with Alaska many, many years ago. It's expanded into California. It's all the way through Colorado. It's from Florida. It's now in Texas. Texas has just allocated $1 billion for the school voucher program. The application's open on February 4th. What's that, next week? The voucher program allows families to use public money to pay for private school tuition as well as homeschool. The homeschool allocation.
What a blessing for homeschoolers in Texas, Kevin.
Oh, yeah. And that's what they're thinking, right? $2,000 per student per family. So a family of 8 kids.
$16,000.
$16,000. I mean, that's a windfall.
All of the Generations curriculum that
you could
be.
just order as much Generations curriculum as you want now in Texas for free. And it's all free.
All free.
It's all free.
Free.
The eligible private school students are getting $10,000 in Texas. Participating child with disability can receive up to $30,000 of this voucher money. So what do we have? 30 states now with ESA voucher programs. 15 states have the voucher program. 18 states have ESAs, and 20 states have a scholarship tax credit program. Now, I want to distinguish between tax credits and vouchers for just a moment. Let's say that the government came up with an idea to establish a tennis shoe fund, and here's the way it works. At the beginning of the year, they tax you. So it's $400 per person. You pay your $400 in tax to the tennis shoe fund. At the end of the year, they give you $200 to purchase a pair of tennis shoes, but you can't buy tennis shoes with Christian insignia on them, and you certainly cannot buy tennis shoes from any certain suppliers. Now, I think the average, rational, freedom-loving American would come back and say, I've got an even better idea. How about I keep my $400 and just buy my own shoes? How about that? Instead of the $400 to the government, $200 for administrative fees, and $200 back to the individual to purchase shoes. But of course, there's a limitation to what you can purchase. So do you see the difference between the voucher program and the tax credit program? There's a difference here.
And one of the reasons people go for these deals is because there's some very good marketing behind these initiatives. School choice.
That sounds good.
Who would possibly be against more choices for families?
Oh, I know.
Pro-choice. Oh, wait.
Well, the word choice is one of the most popular existentialist terms of the day, right? It appeals to the modern mind. So this is huge, and it's really inviting, I would say, 90% of the Christian conservative, homeschool, private school population. There's not many that are going to turn down $2,000 per child or $10,000 for private school enrollment in the state of Texas. Not too many are going to. They're going to be getting in line on February 4th to apply for this funding. $1 billion of tax money redistributed into the pockets of homeschoolers and private schoolers. So now there's a couple of issues, and let's hit these issues. First of which is this: what the government funds, the government controls. And that's one reason why, we want to go with the tax credit for the tennis shoe fund. Because with a tax credit, with no strings attached, we're assuming no strings attached, is simply, I'm keeping my own money, I'm buying my own tennis shoes. And you're not going to tax me on this. And you're not going to give me any money. I just keep my money.
And I choose not to spend it on tennis shoes.
I choose not to spend it on tennis shoes if I want to, right? Yeah. I can spend it on whatever I want to spend it on. So that's the freedom-minded person. But the people that are, in the socialist mindset are going to find this to be a great idea because they've been raised socialists, probably in American public/socialist schools. So now the thing that people need to understand is
hang on. Are you saying that everybody that takes a school choice voucher has a socialist mindset? I mean,
Oh yeah, because we all have a socialist mindset.
Okay, all right.
Okay, it's time to get past the denial phase. Okay. We're right now we're in group therapy. My name is Danny, and I'm a socialist. My name is Kevin, and I'm a socialist. Honestly, I think we should get past the denial phase on this. We are to some extent, socialists.
By nature and by our experience.
By nature and by our nurture.
Yeah.
We are. I mean, can we all admit this? Can anybody else say amen? I was raised this way. I was born this way. This is what happens. But now here's the thing we need to remember is that right now people are saying, but there are no strings attached. Okay? There's no strings attached to the hook. Okay, you're dropping a hook into the golden hook.
Right.
It's a golden hook. And at this point, a golden hook is, if it weighs about an ounce, it's running about $4,500. So it's a pretty good hook. So you're dropping a golden hook into the brook, and these fish are grabbing for it. And what they're saying is there's no string attached to it.
And in a sense, that could be true. There may not be any legal strings attached, but there's always one big string attached to money, and that is the string of dependence.
Well, yes, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But here's one thing people need to understand. We are extremely close to Title IX applying to private schools, private colleges, and homeschools that take the government money and distribute it through Pell Grants or whatever it is. We are extremely close to this. Bostock, hey, we're Bostock close to Title IX applying to government schools. Bostock brought Title VII into private hiring and private businesses. If that be the case, we are one Supreme Court justice away from this, and we may be there, depending on how this transgender decision works its way out in the Supreme Court right now. So people would need to understand this. We are right there. We are so close. We are so close. We're one president away. We're one Supreme Court justice away. We're one Supreme Court decision away from Title IX applying, which means what? Which means that you are going to have to hire LGBTQ persons for your children's programs. You will have to teach LGBTQ material in your social studies if you're taking the government money.
So they just say, well, then when the strings come, we'll just stop taking the money, Kevin. It's not that complicated.
To which we have to say, will they or won't they?
Right.
I'm not sure. The other thing that happens is as governments get to the point at which they want to control private schools that are receiving public funding, how far are we from private schools who don't receive public funding being controlled by the same powers?
Exactly.
That I mean, the camel's nose gets into the tent. Eventually, he's got his shoulders in there, and then pretty much he's in the tent, and his master is out on the desert sand. So I mean, we're close. We're getting closer.
If 90% of the homeschool market says we homeschool under the government's umbrella, do you think the other 10% of the market that don't are going to be able to keep the government out of their business?
Pretty hard to do that kind of thing, right?
The government's just going to say, wait, no, 90% of you guys are already doing the government version of homeschooling, and we're going to cover it all with our legislation.
And here's the thing. Freedom's a value, and personal responsibility contributes to freedom. And it's hard to inculcate freedom in a slave-minded social situation. This is the challenge. And of course, as somebody who was hoping that somehow we might exempt ourselves from the slave state, just hoping somehow that a freedom-mindedness might return via the homeschool movement in America or the private school movement in America, that parents would begin to see themselves as personally responsible, and they would see freedom of value, that if they could take personal responsibility for the funding and control of their children's education, that would be a value to them. And they would not want government coming in and dictating the sorts of things that they were doing in their homeschool programs. If that was a value to parents, then they would fight for it. But you know what? There are certain temptations that are going to undermine that love for freedom. One of our founders, Samuel Adams, would say, if you love wealth, if you love vouchers more than liberty, the tranquility of servitude better than the animating contest of freedom, depart from us in peace. We ask not your counsel nor your arms. May your chains rest lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that you were our countrymen. And that is very far from the consciousness or the mindset of the average person in America 250 years hence. It's been about 250 years since Samuel Adams would say something like that. And I don't think that the average American is thinking in terms of freedom from government being a value here.
And how do we build our own economies over generations to be independent of government welfare and government subsidies? That's something that takes generational faith, generational character, generational wealth. All of these things are built up over time, and you can't just flip the switch on that.
Well, people say, yeah, but it'll never happen here. The government will never attempt to fund, control, and, take over private education in America. To which you would say?
Not going to bet on it.
Well, Sweden.
Yep.
Canada.
Yep.
The UK. I mean, I've found multiple examples of how this happened throughout history, where the UK is actually pretty hardcore on the control of education. They give money to the private schools, as does Canada. But the control is just outrageous. You're looking at hiring autonomy restricted. National curriculum mandates are really in place in Canada and Western Europe. Religious instruction often regulated or diluted. Private schools actually just become functionally public schools in these countries. United Kingdom, same way. Faith-based schools receiving public funds must follow national curriculum standards, accept government inspection regimes, and comply with evolving equality legislation, which means LGBTQ stuff. They have to comply with all of that. We're talking about private schools in England have to comply to this kind of thing. And of course, again, the argument is it will never happen in America. To which we would say, you want to bet?
Alex Newman, whom you've had on the program before, draws this out in a little bit more detail in terms of what happened in Sweden. He has family there. And really, one of the things that we should also keep in mind is that while there's a lot of conservative lawmakers that have supported school choice, the roots of school choice can be traced back to UNESCO and the UN's initiatives to control education globally. So,
how's that?
In terms of UNESCO specifically, the global education reports commissioned by them promote the idea that education should be regulated and monitored even when private schools are publicly funded, centralizing standards and accountability under government frameworks. And so the whole idea here is that if we can proliferate government funding and we can bring all programs, all forms of education, all choices under the umbrella of government funding, then we have the right to then regulate it. Simple logic, but I think that's the basic approach.
Right. And of course, the government's going to have a certain worldview that they're going to maintain. And that typically is what they call a pluralistic or polytheistic worldview, humanistic worldview, and a statist worldview. So there's three things that constitute the accepted worldview in the secular state.
Yeah.
The secular state is a ruse. It's a funny little word like, hey, we're a non-religious secular organization over here, when indeed they actually are run by a certain worldview perspectives that affect the way that they look at morality and sexuality. Inevitably what happens is humanism goes the direction of autonomy in the area of sexuality and gender. And that's what Sweden did. That's what Canada's done. That's what the UK's done. And that's what the United States is doing. Does anybody affected by the trends? I mean, obviously there wasn't LGBTQ, indoctrination and transgendered bathrooms in second grade schools in 1972. Or 1982 or 1992. And yet that's the direction that these nations have gone. That's the direction our nation has gone. Trump is setting this agenda back a bit, but do we really trust the system?
Yeah.
Does anybody really trust the system? Do you trust the hook? You grab onto the hook. Are you trusting that the hook is not going to at one point be attached to a string, and you begin to hear this reeling sound of what is that?
Yeah,
sounds like someone's reeling me in on this thing.
Specifically, what happened in Sweden is these reforms were introduced in the 1990s. Same arguments as we hear today: break up the education monopoly, introduce market forces and competition. But within less than 2 decades, the Education Reform Act was introduced under centrist, right, really even somewhat conservative government. And basically that program essentially obliterated school choice because it required teaching the government curriculum, removing Bibles, removing prayer, removing a religious doctrine that conflicts with the state curriculum. And the one package not only introduced these school choice programs, but also simultaneously banned homeschooling. And as a result of that, you basically are left with one choice, and that is whatever the government offers you.
And I don't know as if Christians understand this is a way in which to obliterate the possibility of passing the faith on from one generation to the next. This is the lock hold that the modern secular state has placed upon the next generation and the indoctrinating the next generation into a distinctively humanistic, socialistic sort of approach to life. And I think, you're looking at Sweden as probably the most post-Christian nation in the world today. It's up there.
Yeah.
And so do we want America to turn into that? Is that our commitment as Christians and as Christian home educators, Christian private schoolers? Are we committed to government control and funding of education to the point that that secularism has almost total monopolized control over the minds and the hearts of the next generation, such that the Christian faith will be totally obliterated in this country by the year 2060. As Christians, are we committed to that agenda? I guess that's the question I want to ask Christians who do not see the value of maintaining freedom from state control and funding. That's really critical. Now, let me ask you this question, because I think this applies to all of us. Danny, there is a temptation to take the funding when it's offered. But let's say that somehow you're qualified for food stamps. I mean, this is basically what we're talking about. Government offering welfare, either for your children's school lunch. Evidently, school lunches are included in some of these ESAs. So government's offering you to pay for your children's food, your children's education, and perhaps you have become eligible for food stamps. How are you going to make that decision? Would you receive those food stamps? Would this be a struggle in your own mind as to whether you should take advantage of this government benny?
Yeah. I think I'll share my personal experience on that because I faced that question in college. But I think we should say that I wouldn't want to one-to-one me going into someone's house and taking their bread, and the government going into someone's house, taking a whole bunch of people's bread, including my own, and then passing it out at the end of the street. I wouldn't want to one-to-one those. I do see some distinction there, because let's be honest, we are caught up in a system that is fraught with government intervention, and that plagues many aspects of our lives. So I understand the conscience element of this, is what I'm saying. That being said, when I was going to college, I qualified for the Pell Grant. And let me tell you, $5,000 in that stage of my economic development was
come in handy.
Massive. Yeah. And so I struggled over that one. And at the end of the day, I think, again, people will make different conscience choices. For me, the choice was I want to set a precedent in my own mind, and I want it to be a matter of my own faith and character to not have this dependence in my life, and to trust God to provide for my education. I want to, as it says in Ephesians 4, let him who stole steal no more, but rather let him labor working with his hands, that he may have something to give him who has need. So I wanted to be a self-providing person in my college years.
I guess there's something about receiving charity that I want to hold off for a second and ask myself, is there any way that I can personally be responsible to earn the money in order to pay for the things I need to pay for?
Yeah.
And yet, I'll receive a gift, a voluntary gift, certainly, from time to time. But I'm not going to go out of my way to take those things. And I think you surrender something about your character when you take government funding for your family's food, for your family's shelter, education, et cetera. Wow. Something you're surrendering about your own character, and there's something you're saying to your children. You're surrendering your children's character. Think about the inner city, problem, where 70% of children, 70 to 80% of children in Baltimore or Detroit are born out of wedlock. And there's this generational decline in character that goes on, largely because there's an absence of responsible fathers who are providing for their children. And there's, of course, sexual sin and other things involved. But there's this welfare program that is rotting out the inner cities. Now, do I want to be a part of that? Do I want to sign up for that? Is there any connection in my mind between receiving money for my children's education, receiving money for my children's school lunches, and receiving money for food stamps? And I think there is a connection here. I do think there's something about personal responsibility to provide for your own household that is so basic to life. I'm thinking 1 Timothy 5:8. It's one of the most basic commands in Scripture, that if man cannot provide for the material well-being of his family, his mother, his grandmother, his children, his wife, he has denied the faith. He is worse than an unbeliever. Yeah. So it does seem that the character to be the man in the house, to provide for his family, is important.
There's a huge link between bread on the table and character. I mean, we teach this to our kids all the time, right? He who does not work shall not eat.
Yeah, you got to earn it. You got to work for it.
And so when the government becomes part of your budget, it's resetting the bar of character in your family.
Right.
Or at least it will tend to do that.
Yes.
And so I think and then we have to ask ourselves generationally, do we want the government to be part of our budget such that we are adjusting our family routines, our productive output in light of what's actually required with government subsidies versus without?
Now, but what if you're desperate?
Yeah.
Okay, what if you're really poor? What if, maybe you've been sick for a while and you've lost a job, and what if, you're fairly desperate? Is this a point at which to go grab something belonging to somebody else, or encourage others to redistribute wealth, vote for people who will redistribute wealth such that that wealth will eventually end up in your pocket? And I always think of Proverbs 30, Proverbs 30 verses 8 and 9. This is a prayer to God. In Proverbs 30, give me neither poverty nor riches, feed me with the food allotted to me, lest I be full and deny you. But on the other hand, I say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God. So there's something about, being too poor and stealing and then ending up with profaning the name of the God of our God, which I think means that you are, coming to the point at which, as a Christian, you're saying God is not big enough and good enough for this.
Yeah.
And that's not the testimony to be sharing with the world. I think that's the point that he's making there.
And back to something you said a moment ago, you were talking about receiving something from the government versus receiving a gift from someone. The impact that is generally going to have on you as a person is very different. Nobody's thankful to the government. Nobody writes the governor a thank you note for the food stamp, right?
Right.
But when you're given a gift, that's a very different experience. At least it is for me. I receive something that I sense, wow, someone sacrificed this to give to me. Now it's upon me to steward this so that I can be in a position where I now have an abundance to give to other people. And that's the connection between socialism and the overall generosity of a nation is very, very strong.
The biblical principle that ties into this is 1 Corinthians 7, 21 to 23. If you can be free, use it rather. You are bought with a price. Be not the servants of men. And the argument is, okay, there are some who are so embedded in a socialist or communist system that it's pretty much impossible to extricate yourself from that. Those born into the servile state, those who born into chattel slavery, they don't have much of an option. They pretty much have to sign up for everything. They work for the state, they receive the checks from the state, they receive everything from the state, etc. The stores are owned by the state, the prices are set by the state. It's just, that's the system you've been born into. You've been born into chattel generational slavery. You've been born into the servile state. There's almost no way to get around it. But 1 Corinthians 7 challenges us that as Christians, freedom is a value. Freedom is something we need to strive for. Freedom is something we need to take advantage of. Not food stamps, not vouchers, freedom. That's the encouragement. If we have the option, if there is, in our budget, the option to be free, if that option is available within our system of governance, then use it rather. Why? You're bought with a price. Be not the servants of men. That's the principle here.
I think another practical consideration on this freedom issue, Kevin, is that some people will say, hey, I'll stop taking the vouchers when there are unpleasant strings attached. But that's superficial because there's other forms of slavery going on here, specifically when the government takes a large amount of money like this and redistributes it in a particular segment of the economy, say education. They're inflating that market, and that's what has happened in homeschool markets, inflating the market, and as a result of that, what happens? Prices go up. And then you have a situation in which there is an economic dependence on the government in one more aspect of your life. And even if they're not regulating that aspect of your life, your overall dependence on the government is going to lead you down the path of voting for the policies that are going to provide for you as a result of your dependence.
And let me say that the generational aspect of this is even more severe in that your children are even more so dependent upon the state because of their parents and their grandparents. And what you find generation after generation is each generation, the Gen Zers, the Gen Yers, the Gen Zers, et cetera, are increasingly socialists or even communist in their voting patterns.
Yeah.
So, friends, this is a massive issue, and I think parents need to make these decisions very carefully. What's the last word you would say for parents listening to the program now on this issue?
Well, two things, actually. It was coming to my mind, and I haven't thought about this a lot, Kevin, but within a year or two after not taking that Pell Grant, God blessed me with a job that provided way more than I could have ever imagined. It was a job in sales, and it was way more than what I thought I was going to make. And I haven't made that connection many times, but the point is simply this, like, God has unlimited resources.
Yeah.
And so let's seek him.
Yeah.
And what is he calling us to do? We're not trying to bind people's consciences here, but we are trying to tell the tale of how these things work from a macro perspective. From a micro perspective, God does provide.
And
let's bet on that.
Yeah, and God is bigger than the state.
Yeah.
That's the understatement. That's the understatement of the day.
Yes.
God is bigger than the state.
I'm supposed to chuckle. The other thing, Kevin, is very practically the reality of two-income families coming out of the public schools, 10,000 of these students in Colorado in the last year. How do they make the change? How do they make the transfer from a two-income lifestyle to a single-income lifestyle and buy books on top of that? Mm-hmm. That's a real challenge.
It's a faith challenge.
It's a faith challenge. And it's a challenge that I hope the church will step up to help meet. Mm-hmm. And it's that very scenario that was the genesis behind our initiative here at Generations to make a version of our curriculum free online. We've talked about this a little bit. We'll be talking about it more. It's going to happen later this year. Mm-hmm. But we're going to have over a dozen courses coming out within a few months to help meet this need from a charity perspective.
Yeah. So here's the moral of the story. Let's trust God.
Yeah.
God is trustworthy. God has all the resources. He's bigger than the government. And so I think this is a test of faith. The test of faith is there for all of us as we step out to do the will of God. He's testing us as to whether we believe that he's got the resources and he's got the faithfulness, the concern, the mercy, the grace, the power, the wisdom to provide a way for us that we would rather trust God than we would the government on this one. I think that's the question. Now, friends, I'd encourage you to my book, The Story of Freedom. I deal with some of these issues in the book, The Story of Freedom, because I think this whole principle of freedom is so essential. It's something we have to inculcate into our kids and our grandkids, because at the end of the day, do we really want to leave our kids in gulags and prison camps? Do we really want to sign our children up for the socialist, communist approach to life and to ultimately the breakdown of an economy and a nation and the character of the nation? I don't think so. So let's be sure that we're giving our children a distinctively Christian approach, a biblical worldview foundation for everything that we're doing. And here's one last thing I want to say is more than is caught than taught. I mean, you teach them things, but it's amazing. If you step out and trust in God in these things and your kids are watching you through the whole process, it's amazing the sort of testimony they pick up on and the sort of lessons they'll learn from your example. Well, that wraps up this edition of the Generations broadcast. This is Kevin Swanson as well, Danny Craig, and we invite you back again next time as we continue to lay down a vision for the next generation. This has been a production of the Generations Media Network. For more information, go to generations.org/media.